Welcome, everybody. We are back with another episode of ShiftED podcast coming to you. I have Dr. Graham Carr here, who is from our Concordia University, who is the president and vice chancellor there. And Graham, you've been there for quite some time, from what I can tell.
Yeah, I've been there since 1983, Chris. So
Nice.
part of the furniture
Nice.
at this point.
Right. And I guess my first question is like what are the most biggest surprises that you've encountered as you've, you know, established yourself here in Quebec in English University? Um, what sticks out to you as this environment or this, ecosystem that we have that surprised you the most over these years?
Yeah, so I grew up in Quebec. I grew up in the Eastern Townships, and then I
Mhm.
I left to do university. Studied in Ontario and Sweden in the U.S., and then came to Concordia in '83 on a 10-month contract to teach history, and I'm still here. So I have to be honest, Chris. When I first came to Concordia, I didn't know very much about the university at all. I arrived. It was less than 10 years after the merger had happened between Loyola and Sir George Williams University, which created Concordia. I was, at that point, just pretty much focused on trying to get my feet on the ground and see if there was a future for me in academia. I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the bigger picture.
Mhm.
Um, and I think what I see now is that at that time in the early 80s and maybe through the 80s and early 90s, the university served a pretty vital function in Montreal in particular in terms of providing educational opportunities for a lot of individuals who might not otherwise have seen university as an option for them. There were a lot of part-time students at that point. There were a lot of, I was struck when I first arrived at the university by the number of adult learners, people who were working during the day and doing courses at night. And it was a very, I think, community-oriented university, and you could tell that it was really anchored in Montreal.
Mhm.
Over time, the university's changed a lot. It's grown. We're now close to 50,000 students all in, full-time, part-time, continuing education, regular academic programs, graduate, undergraduate.
Mhm.
And demographically, the university's become much more diverse as well. So I think it's playing I continue to believe that Concordia is a pivotal institution for Montreal and for Quebec, but it's playing a different role today than it had in the past. That's for
Right.
sure.
Totally. And Graham, could you give us kind of a state of affair of how's it going now I know that our English universities, um new bills coming in,
Yeah,
demographics
yeah,
changing.
yeah.
um where do we stand right now as an English university within the province of Quebec?
Yeah, so maybe before I get specifically to English universities, Chris, what I would
Hmm.
say is that this is a really challenging time for universities generally in Canada.
Right. Right.
So I think if you look across the country, with relatively few exceptions, universities are facing very severe financial challenges. That's certainly the case at Concordia, where we're dealing with a significant structural deficit. But we're not alone. The vast
Hmm.
majority of universities in Quebec are in a deficit situation, and many universities across the country find themselves in that situation. It's not just about the economic health of the university system. However, I think there's been a certain amount of public critique of universities over the last few years. Some of it has happened south of the border and has bled into the Canadian context with people, questioning the value of a university degree, whether it's still a worthwhile investment for students and for parents. I would say the answer to that is unequivocally yes, and the data certainly underscores that. But the
Totally.
questions and the skepticism are out there.
Right.
Uh, I think that's those are realities that all universities are trying to address right now.
Mhm.
For Anglophone universities in Quebec, well, there are three of us, and we're very
Right.
different places,
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
Bishops has one reality, McGill has another, and Concordia has a third. And obviously, it's been a challenge for the three of us, particularly since the fall of 2023, when the government of Quebec, introduced a number of policies that were targeted at the Anglophone institutions. There's no other way around it.
Yeah.
Um, and I think were designed to make us weaker,
Mhm.
which I'm very troubled by for obvious reasons. I think those policies that were introduced, which raised the tuition that rest of Canada students would have to pay, which changed the formula for the funding of international students, so that we we ended up paying back money to the government of Quebec instead of
Mhm.
conserving tuition fee. That weakened our economic situation, our financial situation, our budget situation, and it created a reputational
Right.
challenge for us because it sent a very negative signal
Mhm.
outside the province about how welcoming Quebec was. Now, uh, unfortunately, all universities in the network in Quebec are tasting this bitter medicine because of other policies that government has introduced, both at the federal and provincial level, restricting student visas,
Mhm.
lumping international students into larger questions around immigration when international students are not immigrants. They're here on study permits.
Right. Right.
Um, and of course, then in Quebec, within the last month or two, we see other bills on the horizon. Bill 1, the constitutional bill, which makes no provision for academic freedom, which has created a number of concerns within the university community about, for example, our ability to, as a public institution, to take legal action against the government of Quebec, as we had done in the past,
Mhm.
if we feel that that's the only recourse that's left,
Mhm.
and which denies multiculturalism as a principle, and
Mhm.
obviously for a university like Concordia, but I would argue, frankly, for most universities in Quebec,
Right.
we are very multicultural at this point.
Mhm.
But that ideologically is not where the discussion, the political discussion is in the province at the moment, and then
Mhm.
most recently, the proposed Bill 9 on
Right.
the ACT on secularism obviously has provisions in it which directly affect activities happening on university campuses, but also potentially academic opportunities for students in education, for example.
Mhm.
So there's a whole
Right.
um, cocktail of
Yeah.
policy challenges, some of which are especially um, harsh for Anglophone institutions, and others of which are just generally a challenge for universities as a whole. I think,
Mhm.
unfortunately, the university this is my seventh year as
Mhm.
president of the university, and I was in senior administration previously. I think, unfortunately, we're at a point where the health of universities in Quebec is less strong today than it
Mhm.
was 7 or 8 years ago.
Wow. Wow. And when you're facing all of this, like I imagine there's lots of conversation about, strategies. How do we adapt ourselves? How do we like what is Concordia looking at in a way to adapt to this continuously changing landscape
Yeah.
that as you said, we're all kind of facing here in Quebec.
I think there are a few, and again, the recipe is different for each of the
Yeah.
three universities. Um, part of the challenge, Chris, is to get um, Monsieur, Madame, tout le monde, and certainly the government to understand what Concordia actually is.
Right.
We're constantly faced with stereotypes. So even, I'm even somewhat uncomfortable with the labeling of Concordia as an Anglophone university because,
Mm,
yes, we're a university that delivers courses and delivers services primarily in English, but we serve a much wider population. We're not just serving the 10, 11% of Quebec society that is defined as Anglophone.
mm,
70% of our students come from Quebec, but somewhere between 25 and 30% of our student body is Francophone.
right.
And we have a significant international student component as well. So part of the challenge, I think, in terms of how we respond to this rapidly changing situation is to constantly remind people of who we actually are, as opposed to who we are sometimes caricatured as. And
Mm,
and unfortunately, in some of the public policies that we've seen in the last couple of years, they've been based on stereotypes, not
mm.
not data.
Interesting.
And the judgment that we received, was very clear about the lack of data-driven policy with regard to some of the provisions that the government was pushing forward. So I think that part of it is to assess or to communicate who we actually are,
Mm,
communicate what the value is that we bring to Quebec society. Yes, we bring value to the Anglophone community, but we bring value to the entirety of Quebec society, and I think to all of Canada as well. And because the situation is changing so rapidly, the challenge is how you adapt to that in terms of your adjusting your recruitment strategy or establishing, the priorities in a
mhm.
period of economic challenge. You can't do everything that you were once doing. So,
Right.
what are the things that you need to prioritize going forward that you think will differentiate you? And for me, this is the big challenge for any university is how do you differentiate yourself? What is the value proposition that you're putting out there for potential students, for parents, for partners and collaborators in the research sphere
Mm,
that will lead them to want to be part of that,
right.
to make you a university of choice.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge that we face. That challenge has become a lot more difficult because of the negative perceptions around Quebec and to some degree Canada.
Mm,
Um, and I think we really need to
yeah. Yeah.
battle on that front.
I totally agree with you too that educational institutions are really bad at selling themselves, like it's just maybe not bad, but we tend to, like want to support, and we do all this great community and growing our kids and getting them ready to be active members of society, but that selling aspect, I guess, is sometimes we struggle with, like we're not a business, but we kind of are, like
Right.
our
So we don't we communicate who we are, but we don't market who we are.
right.
And I think, this is an issue that we actually have to discuss very seriously within the university.
Mm,
Um, the global context, and I really mean the global context for
right.
universities has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years. And how you position yourself has become just that much more complicated because of the competition for space that's out there, because of the competition for students that's out there. Students have a lot of choice right now.
Right.
In Quebec, students have a choice of 17 or 18 universities if they want to stay here. If they want to look at Canada as a whole, they have a choice of 95 universities. If they want to look in terms of North America, the choice goes up by thousands. And if they want to look globally, we're talking 10,000s. And that's true for students elsewhere as well. A
Right.
student growing up in China or Hong Kong or Lebanon or Germany, they've got a lot of options as well. So
Mm,
I think that has changed the global dynamic around education.
mm.
And and you know, if you don't market yourself, if you don't communicate effectively, you're not going to be seen as a first choice university. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And with all of that also comes staying relevant in as the world evolves. And with the advent of AI coming into our worlds, I mean, it blew the doors open of education.
yeah,
How do we adapt to this new landscape that we're all kind of facing? And I mean, frankly, in the public sector, we are skating a bit,
yeah.
how we're going to adapt our education and how we teach and how we evaluate um, seems to have to adjust a little bit. How are the universities dealing with this new influx of this new technology that just seems like it's going to be getting bigger and bigger? I mean, I heard the turnover is about 7 months of AI at this point, where it reinvents itself. How do we reinvent ourselves at that pace?
Yeah, so I look. I think all organizations are skating. It's
Right.
not just the education sector. I think businesses are trying to figure out what the workforce of tomorrow is going to look like, what
Mhm.
jobs are going to be um, replaced by AI. What does the implementation of AI mean in terms of creating new kinds of jobs? It's a very fast evolving world. I mean, we have some advantages in the university in that we have researchers who for whom AI and the application of AI is the primary area of focus. So we have expertise to draw on in-house.
Mhm.
And I think, in terms of curriculum development and teaching, there's lots of experimentation happening within the university. And it's across the spectrum of experiences from those who are comfortable with trying to adapt and adopt, and others who are very skeptical and resistant. And I think that's true, across the lines of faculty, staff, students. And,
Mhm.
we're human beings, and we respond to technology and technology change and disruption very differently.
Right.
Um, One of the challenges for a university, of course, is you need to stay as relevant as possible, but it's not as easy as it may seem to integrate change into university.
Right.
For places that put a premium on discovery, on creativity, on imagination, universities tend to be remarkably conservative and
Mhm.
and and not always very nimble in terms of how they adapt to change. So
Right.
now I think there's an acceleration effect that's happening, which is putting new pressure on systems everywhere and on how people think. That's forcing different conversations and forcing change. I can't forecast how this is going to play out over the course of the next few years, but I'll give you one very concrete example.
Mhm.
Something that Concordia committed to 3 years ago was that every undergraduate student, regardless of the program that they were in at the university, whether it was in fine arts, business, engineering, or the sciences, would have access as part of a 4 credit program to what we call experiential learning, which could mean work integrated learning, co-op stage. It could mean mobility exchanges with universities elsewhere. It could mean participation in case competitions with mentors, etc. And the goal of that is to provide students with an augmented learning experience that goes beyond the classroom and brings them into contact with the real world or the non-academic world. We used to have a tagline at Concordia, real education for the real world, and we pulled back from that. I think maybe that was a mistake. Um, so for programs like that to be successful, you have to be in very close communication with potential employers. And you have to understand what their needs are. What is it that they're looking for when they hire a co-op student? Or, as is increasingly the case for large organizations like Bombardier or EY, when they hire 15 or 20 students at a time to work on a problem. So that gives us an opportunity to have a genuine exchange about how the skills needed to translate into the workforce to make the transition into the workforce may be changing, and how can we adapt and better prepare our students in that regard. So for me, that's a very specific example of how universities can be responsive to the disruption that's happening there, not by acting on our own, but by acting in collaboration with others, other
Totally.
actors in society.
I guess my final question, Graham, is we do have this pipeline, as I mentioned, of where kids start in K, they go into elementary, high school, some move on to CEGEP and then university. How and you were talking about collaboration, and it just kind of struck me as how can we collaborate better, do you think, so that we're getting kids that are going to be able to contribute not only to Quebec society, but also to our GDP. And what do you think that the most important skills that we should be working on in our youth sector that would then support you guys in the higher ed that we're overseeing a little bit?
Well, that's a really good question. I'm not sure that we've really taken a look at in Quebec at at the the chain of education, that we've seen it as a system, as a pipeline. We've tended to look at things as fairly discrete entities. Obviously, we're recruiting a lot of students from SAGEP, so there's a grid in terms of what the entry scores are for different programs, etc. I think there's space definitely for a stronger collaboration and identification of skills that we're looking for. A couple of things that I would point out is, I think when we're at Concordia, um, in the business of recruiting, it goes back to what I said about positioning and differentiation. So, what is it that we can offer students that they might not get elsewhere? And part of that begins with the quality of the student experience, so that the university experience is a very formative moment for 18 to 24-year-olds. How can you augment that? But also, to go back to what I just said, if we're placing this emphasis on experiential learning, on work integrated learning, how do we make that known to prospective students that they can be thinking ahead to, yes, I can do a business program. I can do a business program at this school or that school. I mean, you'd be crazy not to choose the John Molson School of Business right now, because it was just named by Bloomberg Business Week as the top business school in Canada.
Yep.
But part of that is also because of all of the opportunities that the business school offers to students to participate in case competitions, to participate in co-op, etc., which are real trampolines to move on into the next next phase of one's life. Something else that's been a big success for us in the last few years has been a startup incubator that we've been running on campus called District 3. And the reason why that's become a success, I think, is because we realize that there are, and we're not unique in this, but we realize that there are a lot of university age students who have an entrepreneurial spirit. And there's not been a classic pathway for them within traditional academic programs to express that entrepreneurship. So the success of the incubator, and it's drawing students from all faculties, from the arts, from sciences, engineering, etc. The success of that incubator is that it provides yet another opportunity over and above the learning that you have in the classroom and your academic program, to really express yourself as an individual and move on to do other things. So I think making sure that people know that those opportunities are there, the prospective students know that those opportunities are there, that it's clear, through the chain of high school and SAGEP, that, you're not just programming students to enter a biology major or a chemistry minor or whatever, but you're
Right.
trying to expose them to a wider university experience. One of the areas where I think we've been hugely successful is actually in our Faculty of Fine Arts.
Hmm.
The Faculty of Fine Arts is probably the top fine arts program in all of Canada. It draws students to outstanding programs in the studio arts and photography. We've just created a new school of the performing arts.
Yeah.
We have the largest cinema school, one of the two largest cinema schools in North America, and unique programs like design and computation arts.
Hmm. Wow.
Students are Potential students are just bashing down the doors to get into those programs.
Yeah.
And you see the impact at the other end too. And to me, if I can circle back to, one of the first questions, when I look at the contribution that Concordia is making to Quebec society, it's also the incredible contribution that Concordia is making not only to the vibrancy of Anglophone Quebec society, and you can look at Governor General's awards winners and winners of Montreal literary book prizes and so on and so forth. And there's a huge list there. It's also what we're contributing to the vitality of the the francophone identity of
Right.
Quebec culture.
Totally.
One of our researchers, Nadia Muir, was awarded the Bourgeois Prize a couple of weeks ago. That's the top prize for contemporary art in Quebec. It's
Hmm.
like a prize offered during the context of L'Ordre du Québec.
Right.
Well,
That's
there have
amazing.
been 5 Concordia winners in the last 7 years of that prize.
Hmm.
That's saying something.
Yeah. That's a great
In
achievement.
terms of film, Jessica Lee Gagne, one of our graduates, the first woman to win a cinematography Emmy Award this year for her work on Severance. People like Chloe Robichaud, the cinematographer whose film Deux Femmes en Or has been a bit of a sensation this last year. She's a
Right.
Concordia grad. Natalie Petrovsky's a Concordia grad.
Hmm.
Mark Sagan is a Concordia grad. So Concordia is not just an instrument for the development of Anglophone culture and society. We're really plugged into the reality of Quebec, and I think from a in terms of the francophone culture and identity. And if there's something we could do to break down that artificial distinction
Hmm.
between Anglophone and Francophone, solitudes and
Hmm.
talk instead about what Concordia contributes and brings value to the identity of Quebec as a whole. That would be a great place for Concordia to land in the future.
Absolutely. So well said, Graham. We're going to leave it at that because I think that statement is something we need to think about. And there's lots of partners out there, there's lots of community out there that I think sometimes just little bridges need to be built to, elevate the beauty of Quebec,
Yep.
in its languages, in its cultures, in its diversity. So I really appreciate your time, Graham, and kind of shining a little bit of a light on where we're at and where we want to go. Lots to think about, and I really want to thank you for your time today and just sharing your thoughts and very insightful. I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for
Well,
your time.
pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Chris. I enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Best of the season.